often, often there is decisions are made where the non-financial factors override the financial, or at least play a very major role. So in qualitative research, we're trying to understand how this sort of thing happens. So we're looking for rich, thick, holistic understandings. In other words, we want to walk into the real world of managers, staff, all the people involved in organizations, customers, clients, and it's a very complex, messy world, as you and I know. And we want to look at that whole complex set of processes and how they interact so we can understand better and so we can detect the accounting context. And we realize that there will be different viewpoints, different accounts of how that all works. So we don't try in qualitative research to apologize for not being quantitative. We don't try to say we can predict anything. We're not trying. That's not our methodology. What our methodology is doing is it's trying to understand processes and explain how and why things happen as they do. So that's a major point, I think, for we qualitative researchers. The best qualitative researchers now never apologize for what they're doing. We never apologize for a small sample. We never apologize for no statistical generalizability, because that's not what we're contributing to the literature. We are doing something different. We are trying to understand and explain processes and contexts. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar, what does Lee Parker mean by qualitative research? Well, here's a nice menu for your banquet, and there are many more qualitative methods. So, for example, there is a Routledge publishing book, which was edited by myself, Catherine Haynes at Northumbria University, Zyril Hoke, who's professor at RMIT University in Melbourne. And we've just completed the second edition. Now, it's rather a big book, and it has lots of authors, but it has many more methods than even the list I'm giving you on the screen here. All of these methods are different ways of trying to investigate processes and contexts and to understand what is happening, what it means to the people that are involved. We're trying to understand, we tend to call the people in the field, okay, that are out there doing things, be they in accounting firms or, be they in corporate organizations. In our sort of language, we call them the actors. It's almost like they're actors on a stage. It's just a label we give them. But we're trying to understand the actor's world. Now, when I talk about unpacking reality, what I mean is pulling it apart into small bits to understand all the components of what we can see. Now, when I say what we can see, it might be we're observing operations, physically observing them. It might be that we're interviewing somebody and we're trying to see what they're talking about, how they see the world. It might be that we're looking at historical documents to see what their world was like. And we're trying to, and that's what we call unpacking, okay? And we're trying to unpack reality. Now, what do I mean by I have done quite a few qualitative methods courses, And some of you may know that I convene an annual qualitative research methods colloquium in accounting and business, and it moves around the world. I ran it in Singapore in 2019 at ESSEC Business School in Singapore. There were some of your Indonesian colleagues attended that. So maybe one of you were there, maybe. And it's a 2-day intensive set of presentations. So I usually use between myself and say 3, 4, 5 professors, and we cover maybe 5, 6 different methods. So I've ran it in Aberdeen in Scotland this year. Last year I ran it in University of Nord in Bodo in Norway, up in the Arctic Circle. There were people that came from as far away as Bangladesh to it. Now, one of the things I often do when I introduce qualitative methods to an audience, if there is a desk or a podium in front of me, I may say to the audience, I wonder what you think this is, this desk or lectern, podium for the speaker. And I may say, well, if you're quantitative, you may decide there is one desk or one podium there. As a qualitative researcher, I may look at the same desk or podium and decide, well, I don't care what it is. It is a device that gives me status, or it's a device that separates me from the audience. So in other words, my reality might be different from someone else's reality, and we're looking at the same thing. So in other words, a qualitative researcher regards reality as perception. We can often learn more about how people think, how they are behaving, why they are behaving that way, if we can understand their perception of what reality in the organization or the community or in the environment, what reality is for them. Now, we also have a view as qualitative researchers that is accounting a neutral, disinterested activity? Is it like neutral, autonomous, not affected by anybody? And our answer is no, it's not. Do we think that accounting, say financial annual reports, sustainability reports, budget reports, do they reflect external forces? Do they reflect, say, government regulations? Do they reflect professional standards? Do they reflect the views of senior management? And our answer is yes and no. Why yes and why no? Because we argue that from the evidence that we've found many times over, that accounting actually drives external factors, external people, external institutions. So it does reflect them, but it also drives them. So accounting constructs and reflects its environment, and it's embedded or integrated with lots of different contexts: social, institutional, historical, regulatory, economic. Hey, you can name more. So as qualitative researchers, we accept that my reality might be different from your reality. Some of you may differ between you in what you think reality is of a particular practice or a particular standard or a particular policy. It's socially constructed. We construct our reality ourselves. Now, some of those realities we construct as a group. You know, it might be an organizational philosophy. Some of those realities we might construct as a teaching team, for example, or as an individual. It tends to be something that emerges over time. So often in qualitative research, we're interested in what we call a longitudinal view. We don't want to take an instant snapshot. If you run a survey, you are constructing an instant snapshot of how people respond. It's virtually like a balance sheet. It's instant at one point in time. The answers you get may change a week later. They may have been different a month earlier. Whereas in qualitative research, we accept that things change over time. So we try to look at a particular phenomenon, all right, or a practice over a period of time. And everything's relative, and we pay a lot of attention to context, because often the context explains what our findings really mean. Again, we're back to, I suppose what I should say is that in qualitative research, we don't try to construct laws of behavior, because we understand that laws of behavior, they change over time anyway. Nor do we try to predict behavior. See, even, I'm involved in probably too many areas of research. One of my areas is accounting and management history. Now, you cannot, or you should not, use history to predict what's going to happen next, because the context has always changed. However, you can use historical research and historical findings to understand better how we got to where we are and what our options might be in the future, so they can better inform decision makers' decisions about today and tomorrow. Now, let me make a few sort of criticisms, I suppose, or reservations about positivist quantitative research. And it's valuable. There's a role for it. No, I have no problem with that. But we know in Indonesia, in Australia, in the US, business schools seem to be obsessed with quantitative research. And a lot of that research never gets read by many people and has almost no value to practice and policy. And I'll say something about that a bit later in this presentation. There are problems with quantitative positivist research because it tends to assume that accounting is neutral and is independent, and the research is independent, and therefore its analysis is objective. Well, I'm sorry, I disagree. No researcher is independent. We qualitative researchers are not independent, and the quantitative researchers are not independent. Why are the quantitative researchers not independent? Because they have read the prior literature, so already they've become biased. They then create, for instance, survey questions which have been biased by the literature reviews. Indeed, the questions they may ask about a particular issue may not be what the survey respondents think is most important. So the survey respondents may answer the questions, but the survey respondents may be off managing something else. So in other words, our questions all focus on that, but the survey respondents are all worried about the pen, not the book. All research, both quantitative and qualitative, whether you want to admit it to yourself or not, all research is infused with that list I put there: culture, values, beliefs, stories, language, blah, 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 blah. Okay? And there's no one model for how to do things, and there's no one interpretation of how accounting, management control, audit works. There are multiple stories and multiple accounts. It is like watching a road accident. Okay, two cars collide. There are three people standing at different positions who saw that accident. When the police interview them about what happened, I can guarantee you the police will get some significant differences in the stories that the witnesses tell them. You know, it's just human nature. So what we have to do is we have to admit to ourselves that we are grappling or trying to understand and explain a very messy, complex, and uncertain world. So when my quantitative sisters and brothers build models, they assume that they have a set of variables and all other things are constant, but all other things are never constant. I guess the little poem I love that warns against assuming everything is constant goes, as I was sitting in my chair, I knew the bottom wasn't there, nor legs, nor back, but I just sat, ignoring little things like that. It's always nice to have a poem. We're at university. We need to be cultural. So the challenge is, we qualitative researchers would argue that the quantitative positivist research is important. It plays very important roles. There are certain types of questions it's very good at answering. It can assist us trying to predict things. You know, that's all good. But if we only do quantitative positivist research, we are neglecting very important areas about which we don't know a lot and which the positivist methodology is not designed to answer. We also have another challenge, and that is that a lot of research students are only trained in quantitative methods. They're not trained in qualitative. So then we find that our research community in the business schools and the academics, usually there's a minority group who have qualitative research skills, and therefore it's a smaller group that can investigate very important questions, often considered important by practitioners and policymakers. But we qualitative researchers face what we call the glass ceiling. Now, we are accustomed to discussions of gender imbalance in organizations where, for example, women executives or women professors in universities face the glass ceiling. They have to demonstrate greater skills, greater qualifications, greater outcomes than the men to break through the male glass ceiling. Well, qualitative researchers have to do the same. Usually, qualitative researchers have to work harder, do more, produce more evidence, and really justify themselves in a business school more than a quantitative researcher. So the example, when I say here on my slide, you need superior methodological explanations, what I say to you is this. And I have quantitative professors who are very sympathetic to qualitative research in the UK and Australia, and they agree with me. And that is that in a thesis chapter or a research book chapter or a research article, the methodology or by a researcher to be better than the method section or chapter, because we have to really demonstrate to the reader that we have done a rigorous job of work. We have excellent evidence. We have justifiable arguments. In fact, I argue to young researchers and PhD students that you are playing a psychological game. As a qualitative researcher, what you've got to do is you've got to get to the end of the chapter or the end of the method section and have convinced the reader that this is an excellent study, it's a reliable method, it's producing really important evidence, and you get them at the end of that section or chapter to stop thinking about the method and be confident in the method and start focusing on the results. So that's the game we have to play. Now, I've said here the world is not flat. You often find, if you're a qualitative researcher presenting to an audience that has, say, many quantitative people in the audience, you have to explain some very basic things about qualitative method to the quantitative audience. It's like, we know the world is round, but we have to explain sometimes to a quantitative audience that the world is not flat, it's round. In other words, we sometimes find ourselves as qualitative researchers having to go back to very elementary introductory explanations of what the purpose of qualitative research is, why we do it, what it delivers, because people are not so familiar with it. So what do we deliver? Okay, so let's say I convince you that I'm okay as a qualitative researcher. Qualitative research has good methodological principles. It can be relied on if it's properly executed. So what do we deliver to you? What can a qualitative study or researcher deliver to you? Okay, so here's a little list. First of all, we get a lot closer in to the actors, the people in the organization and their world. In fact, I often say to researchers who do interviews or participant observation or video research that you yourself are the research instrument. So whereas, let's say we're conducting a survey, the survey instrument, the questionnaire, that's the research instrument. So in other words, that stands between the survey respondents, the actors, and us, the researcher, and in between is the data collecting instrument, which is the survey questionnaire. But as a qualitative researcher, very often there's nothing standing between us, the researcher, and the actor. We are the research instrument. So we get to penetrate or experience actors' perspectives, the way they see the world, and the way they make sense of what they're doing. Because some things that we may see them doing may look ridiculous to us. There was a very famous study conducted by an American qualitative researcher in management called William Foote White, done in the US, I think it was back in the 1950s. And he was watching workers on a production line. Don't worry about what he was trying to find out, but he was observing them on a production line. And he observed a particular team of workers every day. And he wrote a little piece that was called Banana Time. And what he did was he watched them and he found that there was one worker brought 2 bananas to work every day. And there was a coffee break mid-morning where the production line would stop and they would all stop and have a short break. Every day, his worker friends in the team would steal his bananas and he would chase them and they would run around and peel the bananas and eat them. And the next day he'd bring more bananas and they would do the same thing. And the next day he'd bring more bananas and they did the same thing. And this looked absolutely crazy. I mean, why would he do this? Why would they do it? Now, gradually, William Foote White realized that it was actually a team building exercise, that actually he enjoyed them doing it. They enjoyed doing it. They remained very close-knit friends, and it was a team building. It was a team building thing. They actually enjoyed it. It gave them a break from the routine of the production line. It made them feel like a community, there you are. That's the only way that you could access that and understand the actor's perspectives and sense making. And it's understanding change processes from the inside. You're there, you're inside. So one of my favorite phrases is that you find out what it's like to be there. Now, in case you're thinking, well, that's okay for observation, but like, what about interview? I have found many interviews I've done, and my colleagues find it, that it's a very intense personal engagement. Okay. And that it is surprising how honest and open and detailed people being interviewed become. Very often, they've never been interviewed by anybody about what they do, how they do it, what they feel about it. And look, I'll give you one example. I have a great colleague here in Adelaide who did his master's thesis and his PhD thesis with me in Bangladesh. Okay. One he did by interview, looking at the adoption and implementation of international financial reporting standards. So he was interviewing professional bodies, regulators, blah, blah, blah. Another one, he was looking at a North American management control system that had been installed in a major public sector organization and why it didn't work, even though nobody wanted to confess formally that it didn't work. And I remember him saying to me that he really learned how to do interviews because initially he would sit down with, say, an important officer of the organization and he would start asking questions and he could see that they were very tense and they were trying to make sure they said the right things. And he said, I just learned that initially, say in the first 10 minutes, I'm thinking, I'm learning nothing. I'm getting nothing here. That's okay. I'll just sit here, keep listening, keep asking questions. And he said to me that he learnt that even though they had some regulatory restrictions, some organizational cultural concerns, that after about 20 minutes, they just started talking, and it became a very personal, revealing engagement. So, we really can, even in an interview setting, we can understand what it was like to be there. So, finding out what the actors think is really important. Yes, you may have a theory you want to use to help frame your research design. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I've done that. You can do that. But often when you get out into the field and you start either observing the actors or talking to them, you find them doing some things or saying some things that you did not expect, that the theory is not necessarily covering, that the literature either interpreted differently or didn't talk about at all. And when that happens, and I've had emerging scholars come to me and say, I'm really worried. I'm getting results that don't match up with anything in the literature or the theory. And my answer is, oh, great. Oh, this is great. This is really good news because you're starting to find something new and original and significant. So inducing our research agendas from practice is a good idea. And indeed, when you're choosing a topic to research, a lot of accounting researchers will go and look at the previous literature and choose a topic from there. Why not look at organizations you're involved in, the media that you read daily, the professional journals, see what the professionals are talking about? Why not look at what are the big things being talked about in practice? Because the research agendas for you are right there. I mean, the classic case, and now I am very, very, very old, and I'm probably one of the first 5 accounting researchers that moved into the social and environmental accounting research area in the 1970s. Now you know I'm very, very old. Now, for 30 years, there was a small but growing community of researchers, predominantly in Europe, UK, Australia, New Zealand, who were researching environmental impact. And during that time, media, governments, communities started to really focus on it. But if you look at the majority of sustainability, social, and environmental research that's published in accounting journals today, most of those researchers only got into the area in the last 10 years because they finally decided maybe it was a hot topic. Whereas in fact, there was 40 years of prior debate and discussion and concern amongst governments, corporates, communities about that issue. But we accounting researchers did not go look at practice and decide that's important, we better investigate it. So that's just a thing that I would emphasize. So, as I've said, we have to take account of actors' experiences, we have to look at process, and we're trying to actually, in qualitative research, we're trying to improve accounting, audit, management control, implementation processes, and outcomes. So that means not for all qualitative research, but we get out from behind our desk. You know, we go and get alongside people that are experiencing accounting, management control, budgets, reports, all that sort of stuff. They're creating them, or they're implementing them, or they're subject to them, whatever. And we actually have fun with, you know, the world is messy, it's complex, and we find unexpected things. Quite a lot of years ago, I was a visiting professor at University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Very big business school. And there was a great colleague of mine, Professor Tom Lee, who's actually Scottish. He now lives back in Edinburgh, who was there. And I was visiting. And we were both qualitative, but all the other academics were quantitative. And one day he came to me and he said, do you fancy joining me and presenting a seminar to all these quantitative people about the qualitative and historical research that you and I do? And I said, well, you know, if you think they'll come. And he said, I'll do the first draft of the PowerPoints and then you can have a look. So he did, okay. And and he was a very, or he still is, he's still alive, he was a very serious, formal Scottish gentleman. But actually, I knew him well. I know him well. He has a fantastic sense of humor. So the title of the presentation was The Complete History of Rock and Roll in Accounting, which was a bit different. Anyway, we went to the seminar and there was a big boardroom, and I'm sure some of you will be familiar with that. I've been in Indonesia and sat at university and government boardrooms. So all the PhD students were sitting around the board table. All the faculty, all the academics were sitting around the edge of the walls. And we presented. Now, I should say to you that before we walked into the seminar, he said to me, what are you going to wear? And I said, what do you mean, what am I going to wear? He said, well, I think we should look radical, you know, because we're qualitative. And these quantitative guys, they're going to think we're radical anyway. He said, I have a son who is a sculptor and he wears an earring. So he said, I've got a parrot earring. I'm going to wear a parrot earring. So I went, oh, okay. So I wore an American Stars and Stripes tie. So, okay, we present. Right at the end of the seminar, he looks at the audience, and I will never forget this. He looks at the audience and he looks very serious. And he says, you know, the only difference between you guys and your research and me and Lee and our research is that we have fun. I have to say to you that I think the academics had to go to hospital in shock. The PhD students flooded us afterwards saying, oh, we would love to do this sort of research. Just because it is exciting, you do unexpected stuff, and you never know what you're really going to find. Now, and one of the sort of generic forms of qualitative research is field study or field-based case study. Now, the reason I call it field-based case study is that case study can be, you can do a historical case, right? It's a unit of analysis. Is the case an organization? Is it a city? Is it an accounting department within a taxation firm? Okay, that's the case. The case could be done using historical, for going case live, observe it, talk to people. Well, then you're going what we call into the field, like my photo of the horses ploughing the field. So it's a very common qualitative approach. We're trying to engage with people and processes in their natural context. We'll employ multiple data collection methods. So I've had sometimes a young researcher say to me, oh, I'm going to use interview method. And I say, only interview method? And I say, yes, interview method. I say, well, what if somebody invites you to go to some budget control meetings? Oh, I hadn't thought of that. I say, if they invite you, you say yes. So suddenly you're using participant observation. What if somebody says you might like to look at the minutes of the budget committee documentation? You say yes, because you're triangulating. Suddenly you've got documentary evidence, observation evidence, and then you've got interview evidence. So, we employ multiple data collection methods, and you can see there a shopping list of all the different categories of case study. You could be doing one or more of any of those. What we're trying to do as qualitative researchers and going into the field is to see what things appear to be like, manifest, and then to dig underneath by talking to people or observing over time. Remember, it's not a snapshot, it's over time, by observing what really seems to be going on underneath. Because what people tell you or pretend they're doing may not be what they're really doing or why they're really doing it. So field research has potential. Look, you can do a field research study or a case study as a standalone study. So I have PhD graduates of mine that have done their entire PhD on one organisational case. So, like my colleague here in Adelaide, who looked at a major public sector organisation and its budget control system in Bangladesh. It's one organisational case. It's a fantastic thing to do because then you've got time and space to include a lot more examination of context. You've got more time to watch what happens over time. You can learn a lot. Or look, it can be a quantitative adjunct. That is to say, you might do a survey where you get a set of results, and some of those results, you're not sure why they've turned out that way. So, for example, you might do follow-up interviews to start understanding why you've got some of the quantitative results you've got. Or it might be that you're not quite sure what questions to put in the questionnaire. So you go and do some sample interviews with people, with actors, to find out what are the issues that concern them, what do they think about the issue that you're trying to study, get some ideas about that, and then develop some survey questions on that basis. So, qualitative can be done by itself, or it can be done as like a mixed method with quantitative. And what we're trying to do is to build very contextualized accounts and understanding of how things get done or don't get done. I give you an example. I'm always highly amused by any presentations I see on international financial reporting standards. quite a few years ago, I was Vice President International for the American Accounting Association. So I used to attend AAA executive board meetings 4 times a year. There was a lot of flying to the US. And I remember sitting at one of the AAA annual meetings, some of reporting staff explaining they are terrible, they're going to report degrees, and what a fantastic thing it is. And I was already working alongside my colleague who was looking at IFRS implementation in Bangladesh by interview. And I just thought it was so funny because there was no way that those IFRS standards were going to produce reliable, comparable annual reports out of Bangladeshi companies. Something like 85% of Bangladesh companies are private family companies, just for a start. It's impossible to maintain all the regulations because there aren't enough qualified accountants in the public sector. They make a lot more money in the private sector. And indeed, he examined all the IFRS standards, which manifestly his interviewees said, oh, yes, we comply with them. Oh, yes, yes, we do them all. But he found that at least 40% of them, because of historical, political, economic structures and traditions in Bangladesh, they would never be complied with. So we can really get underneath the reality that some people or organizations might try to present, which is not actually the reality. So but we also want to get beyond what happens to understand how things happen and why they happen. And we want to look at specifics. If you show in a quantitative study that there's a high correlation between regulatory change and financial success, that's nice. But if you show that to, say, a particular industry chief executive officer, they may say to you, well, that's nice. Why does that happen? And how do I make it happen in my organization? This is a point that Professor Sue Llewellyn at University of Manchester has made many years over. It's a bit like the regression. The disturbance term in the regression, well, okay, it's a disturbance term. But she's had plenty of corporate executives say, but what if my company is situated in the disturbance term? What have I learned? What do I do? How do I make things happen? So that's why I say we address specifics and we watch longitudinally. Now, let me give you, this is just my version, a very short history of accounting research. And some of you will probably disagree, and that's okay. But as long as I've made you think. In the 1930s to the 1960s, I know that's a very long time ago. Most of you weren't born. Okay. It was all economic. So all of our accounting work and research and professional practice was driven by economic theories. Okay. Economic rationalism. In the 1970s, accounting and accounting researchers started to notice that there were other ways of looking at the world. And so we started to find operations research and behavioral sciences, for example, starting to affect the way accountants and particularly accounting researchers were looking at accounting and audit work. Then we got into the 1980s, and from the 1980s onwards, we had researchers starting to use sociology and sociology theories, organization theory, political theory, philosophy, critical theory, and economic. Okay. So in other words, the range of theories being applied to accounting research, and particularly to qualitative research, grew, and it helped us better identify and understand things we were seeing. Remember my word seeing. We were seeing in that field that we were investigating. Now, when we look at the methodology trends from the 1930s to the 1950s, most of the research methods were descriptive, normative, quantitative. That's, pretty much all. From the 1960s to the 1980s, they became quantitative, statistical, and positivist. And from the 1980s till now, the positivist tradition has continued, and now the qualitative tradition has become very, very established. Now, I have a personal theory about the dominance of quantitative positivism in many global university business schools. I think it's because in accounting, we are a little bit lacking in self-confidence. We are still trying to prove to the world, but really it's ourselves, that we deserve to be at a university, that we're a proper, rigorous discipline. And so we try to prove it to ourselves by being very quantitative, pretend to be science, okay, and to be really tough on ourselves. Let's reject everything because it's not good enough, and we're not good enough. Now, that's my pet theory, but I think I'm right. Let me also say, in terms of the history of accounting research, if you're a qualitative researcher, just to cheer you up, that we qualitative researchers in, say, the 1990s were very in the minority. Yes, we were not established. But now, look across the table. So I take of qualitative literature, be it Scopus or Google site. If you look at the range of journals that are publishing qualitative research and the size of the qualitative community, it is huge. It is now highly established. So that's a little bit of good news, I suppose. Now, let me be a little bit more critical. We can't be happy all the time. So let me make you either disagree with me or maybe be a bit sad. The leaders in accounting developments are practitioners and consultants. It's not us, okay? Now, of course, I do realize that in Indonesia, you have a greater tradition, a good tradition, of academics being involved in practice. And you would know better the extent of that than me, but I have witnessed that. And I think that's a really good tradition. It's a tradition that we had, say, in countries like US, UK, Australia. We had that in the 1950s and 1960s, and then we lost it. So we have become followers. And I've been involved in, and colleagues in quite a few research studies on the practice research gap, okay? So we have evidence on this. So we academics or researchers have become transcribers. We note everything down. We go and look at everything and record it. We comment on it. We criticize it, but we're not very good at building new systems or building ways forward. I was recently presenting the opening keynote address to the Canadian Academic Accounting Association conference in Toronto, in Canada, obviously in Canada. And I was covering some of these sort of issues in my presentation. After the presentation, a very good senior professor, colleague of mine from Canada, came up to me. He does quantitative and qualitative research, so he's very balanced. But he came to me and said, "Hey, look, we do contribute to practice. We do, because when the standard setters want to do a baseline literature review, they go and look at what we wrote." And my answer to him was, well, they might look or commission a researcher to give them a summary, but that doesn't necessarily have any influence. And anyway, there's a lot more accounting policy and practice and audit policy and practice that our profession is involved in than just standard setting. So what can we do? What can we do? I mean, I've listed there the potential research contributions, giving a better understanding to policy makers and practitioners what works and what doesn't work. Looking at the history of practice and showing what our history has been and how that explains what our current practices are. And of course, we educate future practitioners, and that's a very important role. But the problem is that the research practice nexus, and we found this, we've interviewed professional bodies in multiple countries, we've interviewed practitioners, we've interviewed academics and researchers. There's a lot of research studies we produce that are irrelevant to policy and practice because we're not looking at the issues and questions that are currently concerning them. Or we write it in the they can experience so forth and zero to waiting because we chose the way we and that's something that's been written about a lot, and both we quantitative researchers and we qualitative researchers have that problem still. So, okay, what's the qualitative role? It's the best pathway to look at accounting and audit and regulation and governance history and process. It's the best way of getting behind the formal systems that we can see operating and finding out what are the underlying motivations, perceptions, behaviours. It gives us knowledge about accounting policy and practice that pays attention to context. Remember me talking about accounting is not independent. It both reflects its context and it influences its context. And that helps us see that. If we've got statistical survey results, it can help us drill down to understand why we got the quantitative answers we got. So it's really useful at revealing how and why things are done and can be done. So I realize that a quantitative study has to abstract from the real world, if you like, complexity a bit to build a model and to be predictive. I understand that. So it has limitations. But in qualitative research, we embrace the complexity. We look at a very complex situation, we call it holistic, and we say, oh, good, we're going to examine the whole thing, the cultural context, the history of the organization, the experience of the actors and where they've come from, the organizational philosophy, mission, values. So, and some of it's going to be ambiguous and differ between people. That's okay. That's just the way things really are. We're going to try and find out things that then would be useful to people that are managing or regulating that environment, even though it might give them maybe 3 different answers. So if we see things that we did not expect, things that are unusual or different or expected, we say hello, very welcoming, oh good, because we're learning something new. If it's not in the previous literature, we know we're learning something new. There has to be a whole lot of previous, say, global north country accounting research that has some severe limitations because some of its contexts are very different from Indonesia, very different from Pakistan, very different from Uganda. And it's a point I make often to colleagues. I have colleagues at Glasgow who are really specialised in developing country research. And I often say to them, It's a bit like qualitative research. 30 years ago, if you did a developing country study, you're in a minority. It was very hard to get published. Reviewers and editors would say, well, why should I care about Indonesia? Now, of course, we understand that the developing world is extremely important globally, makes huge contributions globally to economies and societies, and often has phenomena, say in accounting and corporate governance, which are very observable, but those phenomena occur in other developing country contexts, so we've a lot to learn and transfer, and they may reveal things that are happening, say, in a developed economy, but which were not very obvious. But once we've discovered them in, say, a developing country setting, and we understand it better there, we can go and look for it in the developed setting, and we find it. So diversity and uniqueness is valuable. If you do a study in Indonesia that's qualitative, you're hoping that you're going to make an important contribution nationally. You're likely to be making a contribution to some similar country settings, and you may well be making a contribution to those who thought they were highly developed. So, not being complex is a pretty good thing. So, the unique offer we make as qualitative researchers, and therefore why we don't apologize for being qualitative, is that we offer practice value at the organization-specific level. I've done quite a bit of research in corporate governance sitting inside non-profit boardrooms, and I've published this stuff, so all observational. Quite a few years ago, I was doing an inaugural professorial lecture at RMIT University in Melbourne, and I was doing it on my research and some colleagues on corporate governance from inside the boardroom in non-profit organizations. And there were quite a number of non-profit board chairs and non-profit CEOs in the audience. When I finished talking about what I found, I had several chief executive officers of large non-profits come up to me and say, you just identified exactly what's going on in my organization. Can I have your PowerPoints? Because you have identified and diagnosed something that's happening, and now I better understand why it's happening, and now I better understand what to do. So in other words, by the fact that I looked at single cases, looked at the complexity, they then went off and did their own qualitative generalizing. Now, I'm not going to talk to you about qualitative generalizing. There's a paper I published with Daryl Northcote in AAAJ on how to generalize qualitatively. It's a very different concept from statistical generalization in the quantitative tradition. But we get to understand managers' and accountants' experiences. We get to accommodate different accounts of the same phenomenon, which are either common, they're the same, or they're different. And we learn something from every one of them. We develop new theories. We directly engage with the field, and we really do get that insider experience. We get to feel what it's like to be there. I can tell you, for instance, one of the big findings I made sitting on a professional body board, doing an insider study on the board, was a huge debate about that board's influence on the sort of overarching organization. And this debate started up, but I understood a lot more about the emotion and what people meant because of their facial expressions and their body language. It was really obvious. And then I stayed behind at the end of the meeting to the sort of social drink session where people started privately talking to each other about what had happened in the meeting and what it meant. And I learned a huge amount I could not have learned in any other way. So here is Confucius. And there is a Confucian saying that I think summarizes all what qualitative research is about. And it goes like this: I hear and I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand. Thank you very much.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much for the really enlightened and insightful presentation. I believe there's more things to say to explain, and so perhaps maybe next time we'll invite you in person to deliver a workshop in Indonesia. Um, yeah. But in the meantime, let's open the floor for question and discussion. Yeah, I think there have been some participant here raise their hand, and so for some maybe you can simply type your question in the chat box. I can see uh Rosalind. Yeah, Rosalind has raised
Uh,
her hand.
Hi,
Yeah,
Rosalind.
Rosalind. Yeah.
I just found your message on the chat box, and I can tell you that Katrina Paisley is doing really well. She's at Strathclyde University now.
Yes, I know
Uh,
that. I email her like between now and then. It's very nice to see you, Lee, and listening to your webinar really remind me of like my days in Glasgow, and I really miss that. Thank you so much for your presentation before. Um, yeah, I mean, since I came back from Glasgow, I found that there are differences in the understanding in terms of research, especially in qualitative. In Indonesia, especially in accounting, most researchers, they are quantitative. So when it comes to qualitative, they have some sort of perception. Well, this is my personal opinion, but based on like when I engage with the colleagues or even sometimes with students, they see that qualitative research is like it's like writing a report. It's like easier because there's no statistics, there is no numbers, or it's kind of like writing an opinion. So that's how I feel. Like I mean, since I came back, and then
Yep.
another thing is as well in Indonesia that there is perception that research is to solve problem. I mean, like, I know that in our research, definitely it has to touch the practical point of view. Sometimes that we put it under the practical implication. However, it is not merely to solve problem. However, in Indonesia, that is the perception that you do research. It's like you're solving problem. And even like sometimes to the extent that how your research can be commercialized. So
Yep.
what is your view on this? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, no, thanks, Rosalind, and it's a great question, and I have quite a strong view on that. Um, I think, and some of you will disagree with me, and that's okay. But I think it's much more difficult for quantitative researchers to demonstrate problem solving because most of the time they are finding associations or predictions of things, but that doesn't tell you how to actually solve the problem. Now, I think that actually qualitative researchers are better placed to address a problem solving focus. So, yeah, I understand that people want problems solved. Good. Um, one of the difficulties or inadequacies of a lot of our accounting research articles is that they end very suddenly. And I'm applying this both to qualitative and quantitative articles. That they demonstrate the answer to the research question, and then it's almost like a small child saying, "I'm tired now. I've done my homework. I would like to go out and play in the playground with my friends. Maybe have a nice cup of tea," and they run away. So, in other words, we undersell what we've produced at the back end of the article. That we actually need to write bigger sections at the back where we talk about the practice implications, the policy implications, the societal and professional impact. And I think that qualitative researchers are better placed because we're usually looking at processes and implementation. We're closer into the field and looking at the stuff that the practitioners and policymakers are trying to actually solve, change, or deal with. Now, I can give you a nice example, actually. Many years ago, I supervised an Adelaide colleague called Nathan Gray, who did a PhD study on the negotiation interactions and tactics between Indonesian and Australian business people. And the way he got at this was he managed to find interviewees in Indonesia, in Australia. He went to trade fairs. He got people to agree to him shadowing them. And he produced a fantastic thesis because he got right inside the process. And he actually probably, it was, I mean, I suspect it was of more benefit to Australian negotiators who many things did none. In fact, after that PhD, he has established a consultancy business, and he's a major consultant right across Asia. And he tells me that the majority of his clients, the vast majority, only want qualitative study and qualitative data. So I think we're very well positioned. If you'll give me one moment, I'm just going to try and connect myself to power because my battery is giving me a running low signal. Just wait one moment.
I can't hear you, Professor Parker. Can't. All right, maybe. Not yet. I don't know.
No, we cannot hear you yet.
Yeah, we cannot hear yet. Yes. Yeah. Not sure what the problem is.
No, still cannot.
Yeah, still cannot. All right. Okay, perhaps let's wait for some minutes. Can you hear us? So far we can't hear you. Oh my goodness. Wow. Not sure what the problem is. Let me unmute and unmute. And we can't hear you yet. Yeah. Perhaps okay. Yeah, I think Professor Liz Parker has left the Zoom, and hopefully he join again. Oh yeah, he's joining now. He's still muted. All right. Oh, we can't hear you, unfortunately. Wow. This is really disappointing. We can't hear you. Oh, you can't hear us as well. Wow.
Parker, maybe you can click join audio in the Zoom link.
Yeah,
When
normally,
you have
yeah. The
you can
audio,
click join audio in the left bottom.
there's an audio button there. I'm not sure where it is the problem, but maybe could you please just try it? He also managed to make you as a co-host, just in case there might be a problem, but unfortunately, still we can't hear you. Wow.
Maybe the problem come from his own room, Zoom room. So it must be solved in his gadget.
Oh. already registered in the Google form, so I have your email. So I'm gonna send the hope. I mean, I'm sure Professor Lee Parker will be very happy to respond all of your questions. So I'm gonna send the response or the answer to all of you. So thank you very much for the again. Thank you very much, Professor Lee Parker, for this guest lecture this morning. It's very enlightened, very thought-provoking. As I said, many things to discuss. So maybe later I will invite you in person. So maybe the committee want to take just like to document to document the guest lecture this morning. Maybe somebody can take the photo together. Oh, already done. Okay, already done. Also, okay, thank you very much. So now it's time for closing. Again, thank you once again to Professor Parker and for everyone that have joining us this morning. And we hope that today's session broadens your perspective on qualitative research and inspires all of us to do more research in qualitative research, especially in emerging economies. I know that Rosalind has raised an important issue about the qualitative research in Indonesia. I did experience that issue as well myself. So let's work together to push forward the qualitative research in Indonesia. And for those who have a quants background in this room, perhaps this is give you some glimpse of qualitative research and its potential. So perhaps you can talk to your colleagues who have a background in qualitative research, and let's push forward the qualitative research in emerging economies, in just like in Indonesia, in Philippines, Timor Leste, and so on and so forth. So please stay connected with us we do have some upcoming guest lectures and academic events. Once again, thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning. Have a wonderful day ahead.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thanks very much.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi
Thanks.
wabarakatuh.
Kalau kita
Thank
bisa
you.
saling dengar ya, kalau kita ya.
Iya, ini
Yang
bisa
sam-
kita bisa saling dengar ini.
Iya, cuma sama Prof. Lee aja yang nggak bisa ya.